There we go. Ken Belson's covered the business of football for the New York Times for more than a decade. His new book, Every Day is Sunday, takes us inside how three power brokers, Jerry Jones, Robert Kraft, and Roger Goodell, transformed the NFL from a sports league into a global empire. Ken, what's going on, man? Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you. It's came out what, Tuesday, so a couple of days into it.
It's got to be exciting. What's it like to get that book in your hand after all your hard work?
Well, I think the goal is to get it in your hands. But
We do, and we read it.
thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting process. I'm speaking generally as a book writer. You know, you spend 2, 3 years sort of in your own head, kind of squirreled away in front of your laptop, and then suddenly you have to turn it into an elevator pitch. But no, it's a lot of fun. And I covered the league for, I don't know, a dozen years now, so it feels very familiar, and I'm glad the story is now out.
How
No,
did
yeah, Jason.
how did you decide that this was the story you wanted to tell after covering the league for so long? Not necessarily the on the field story, but the in the boardroom story.
Yeah, I think it kind of dawns on you as you're doing your job that geez, there's actually a bigger story here. And I've always been amazed as a business writer. Let's say you be on an airplane back when you talk to your neighbor on an airplane flight, or you go to a bar or a restaurant, and people say you cover the NFL, and they're like, they all know it's big, but they don't really know how it got there. And so it's your job as a reporter to kind of tell the backstory to it. I use just one reference point. The NFL now brings in about $23 billion in revenue. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of what Delta Airlines does. And you would say, okay, Delta's big airline and all that. But if you ask the average person, how big is the NFL? They would sort of say it's like Walmart, right? It's everywhere. And so there's this disconnect between how big it is and how much it occupies our brain space. And that's the sort of stuff I'm trying to tell in the background is how did it get to be this big?
In telling this story, we read a lot about Robert Kraft, the three characters, the three main characters. What did you learn about what happened before that led to this three-headed monster?
In terms of why I chose these three, or just how they got to be who they
How did they become the power brokers? It existed beforehand. It was still big. It was not this monster that it is now, but there was a lot of dysfunction beforehand. There
Yes.
was owners suing each other. Uh,
Mhm.
How did they get to the point that these three were able to put it together and blow it up the way that they did?
Yeah, it's a good question. I start the book in 1993 because they were coming out of that period of labor strife. There was a strike in 1987. There were scab players used. It was a really ugly period. And because of that tension, the players wanted free agency. The owners didn't want to give it to them. The networks weren't willing to invest heavily in football because there was a risk of losing games. That was a real thing back in the day. And attendance was sort of sideways, and there were blackout games, if you remember those back in the day. It really took actually Paul Tagliabue, Gene Upshaw, the old Union chief, and Dan Rooney. Those are the book starts with those three, and they all came together as the owner, commissioner, and union chief, and put a foundation under what is now the modern NFL. They brought in a salary cap to offset free agency, so the players got something, the owners got something, and then critically they put in revenue sharing. So now it was a 50-50 split, and at that point going forward, so 30 some odd years now, the players had a vested interest in the owners making money. Then you enter, Jerry Jones came in around that time, Robert just after it. They went heavily into debt to buy their teams, and both were money losing clubs back then. It's hard to think of the Patriots now as money losing, but they were, frankly, the worst team in the league. And they had their own motivations. They were in debt, right? And so they wanted to generate more revenue from their own stadiums, from their own teams. But then they got involved in the NFL, and that's in the NFL league business. And that's where they are different than most owners. They intuitively understood that media money is where the story is, where the revenue will come from. Jerry Jones helped bring Fox TV to the table, Fox Sports. Fox Sports didn't even exist. He brings Rupert Murdoch in as the fourth bidder for the three packages that existed then. And suddenly there's this gold rush of money that comes in from media. Robert was already, he had owned an affiliate, part affiliate in CBS in Boston. And so he knew how the media worked, and he was courting the CEOs of these big companies, Dick Ebersol at NBC and so forth. So those two guys understood media as the biggest slice of the pie, and we need to grow it. And I think that's really been their biggest contribution.
In the intro, you describe the NFL as part religion, part entertainment business. Talk about this idea of the how the American Church of Football shaped your story, and also how even though they have very different personalities and disagreed often, they agreed on the idea that they needed to make the NFL a 365-day experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that they sort of dovetail, right? You turn yourself into a religion when you're on every day. Yeah, there's a great quote in the book from one of Roger Goodell's former deputies, and he said Roger's not worried about the NBA and the other leagues. Of course they're out there and all that, but the NFL is twice as big as the other leagues now. He wants to be thought. He wants the NFL to be thought of as Disney and the Vatican. Disney meaning, family friendly media company, and Vatican institution, cultural institution. And that's really sort of their North Star now. And how do you do that? You fill in the calendar. The NFL is unique. It's really only played in the fourth quarter of the year. With some obviously bleeding into January, and so how do we fill in the rest of the calendar? And so, you think back even in the time I've covered the league, the addition of Thursday night football, the games overseas, streaming. These things have been done pretty slowly and deliberately over many years. Then you get the Super Bowl. What do we do next? We start watching and talking about the combine. When that ends, we go right into free agency. Then right after that, into the draft. And then my all-time favorite, the primetime schedule announce in May. There's nothing they can't figure out how to monetize. They do it very well, I got to say. Fans can be sick of it, and I understand that too. But
Not Jason, me,
Not
yes.
me.
Not Jason.
I am fascinated by their ability to monetize every blade of grass or turf on that field.
yeah, yeah,
Drives Jeff out of his mind.
I get it. Look, I grew up in parking lots, tailgating and going to games, and it was what, $6 to sit
Hmm.
upstairs, at Shea Stadium where I went to games. And now it's a suckers game. I hate to say it. PSLs, okay. I don't know what you have at Lincoln Field, but
Oh,
PSLs are you're paying the owner to build his stadium, and then you can't get rid of your season tickets because you lose the PSL. I have friends who just gave up their season tickets. StubHub has made it much easier to do that. But even Roger Goodell has said, because there have been many complaints about this, look, 97% of our fans never go to a game. So he knows where his bread is buttered. It's a TV product, and the fans largely have become props in that TV show.
So the three characters that are the main characters of this, did you go into this choosing to look at them, or did they choose you? Did you, as you investigated, find out that these were the three that were really running the show?
A little bit of both. So when I first was sort of toying with the idea for the book, I know a lot of the owners. There's a lot of other very influential owners, Clark Hunt, Jeffrey Lurie in Philadelphia. There's no shortage of other characters. But the publisher, the editor basically said, look, you got to narrow it down. It's you don't want a whole cast of characters. Can you imagine if the book had five owners in it? You'd be reading my subtitle still right now. So they really said just pick the main guys, and Jerry and Robert were just head and shoulders above every other owner. First and second in terms of team valuations, 9 Super Bowl titles between them. Seminal in their own way, whether it's media, business, marketing, that kind of thing. So it wasn't hard. They are the most involved in league business as owners, and they have both been called at different times the shadow commissioners. So yeah, it wasn't hard to pick those two. Then there was the question of the third, the law of threes. Paul Tagliabue was very influential, but frankly, at this point, he's kind of a historical figure. So Roger was really the third person, and Roger really took the league to the next level. So there's an opening quote in the book that Pete Rozelle, was Madison Avenue. He turned it into a glamour sport. He used NFL films. The Super Bowl grew into a national holiday. Paul Tagliabue was Wall Street. He put the financial foundation together, as I mentioned, with revenue sharing and so forth. And then Roger Goodell is Hollywood. He's Broadway. He's turned it into a media company. And so that was kind of my arc of the story, how it went from a popular league, one with sort of financial problems, put that foundation in place, got Fox TV in there, and now it's a media company.
It's almost ironic hearing you say that Roger Goodell is Hollywood, because the last word you would ever use for Roger
Yeah.
Goodell, if you look at and listen to him, is
Yeah.
Hollywood. But he is a guy who has to deal with all of these different personalities. And the two main characters you talk about are Robert Kraft and Jerry Jones. Can you talk a little bit about how different these two people? The way we look at them is we see Jerry Jones in our face all the time. You
Yeah.
don't Robert Kraft is really the opposite in that he kind of has stayed in the past, except for Bill Belichick now seems to be dragging him out into the public. How is it that these two men have been able to work together when their personalities appear, at least to us, so different?
Yeah, they are sort of studies and contrasts. I mean, interestingly, they actually grew up in similar ways, although different parts of the country. Small businesses, their dads owned small businesses. They were not wealthy growing up. They both had an entrepreneurial bug, went to business school. Both of them went to business school. Both of them wanted to own franchises at a young age. So they had that in common. But let's face it, there's only one Jerry Jones. He's a bull in a china shop. He's full of ideas. He's bubbling. He can't finish a sentence before he starts another one. There's a little sidebar in the story. I was interviewing him in his office years ago, and he just couldn't stop talking, right? And the sentences didn't all gel, and it's a nightmare as a reporter trying to figure out how am I going to quote this guy. And we get out of his office, and he turns to me, he says, "Just clean that up." So he's very self-aware. He knows he's kind of a carnival barker at a certain level. Then you bring in Robert, Boston, definitely more understated. Uh, Loves the media too, but in a very different way. And Robert isn't so much the idea guy. He's the guy who takes these ideas and finds a workable solution. He also, unlike Jerry, I think, is willing to leave money on the table. Jerry would take twice if he could. Robert said, "Wait a second, we need CBS to survive here. Let's not bleed them dry." So he's a negotiator. He's more diplomatic, and he very much, in a lot of cases, is behind the scenes. Jerry is the only owner who still talks to reporters after every single game, and he has a radio show during the week. For him, all news is good news, whether it's bad or not. And Robert's a little more strategic now, especially after the Belichick Brady saga.
And I think you described them in the book as the bridge builder and the best salesman in the world in terms of the contrast in personalities. When you look at, you've mentioned a few times Rupert Murdoch and Fox. Is that sort of the turning point? He comes in, same game, new energy. Did that moment mark the true start of the NFL's entertainment era, or is there another point that you think exists?
It's definitely one of them. So Rupert Murdoch was nowhere, so to speak, in the media world. If you remember back in the 90s, it was Bart Simpson and In Living Color, and you had to struggle to go find a Fox channel in many markets. They were in channel 56 in Detroit and so forth. He had no
It's like
footprint.
True TV now for the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, right, yeah. Channel 642 on my dial. So he needed something to get people to watch Fox, and he knew from England, where he had the English Premier League, sports is it. And so he didn't necessarily know much about football, but he knew he needed it. And this is where Jerry is actually critical to this. He comes into the league. And back in the 90s, you had CBS had the NFC package, and ABC was Monday Night Football, and NBC was the AFC package. That was it. There were three bidders for three packages. That's kind of how it was. And Jerry said, "What are we doing here? Why don't we run an auction? Bring in a fourth bidder." Well, that was Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch had actually tried twice to be a bidder, and they didn't take him seriously. And shockingly, I can't imagine why. He had no sports division. But they took a real gamble on him. And Jerry understood you need to have an auction. You need to have some competition for these media rights. And that was a good business instinct. When Fox wildly overpaid, if you will, or widely outbid CBS, the other leagues noticed. David Stern at the NBA noticed. The MLB noticed. So I think it changed sports, and networks now realized we're not going to break even, or we can break even if we hope to break even, but we need it as a loss leader, because without football, we're nowhere. And CBS learned that lesson. NBC learned that lesson in the 90s as well. football became essential to promoting your other programming, and that's where Jerry was very critically involved.
You kind
You
of
know,
see
sp-
Amazon doing that now, by the way. Sorry, Jeff. You kind of see Amazon doing that with their pitching of their products, getting the football on to then have their Black Friday sales or their Amazon Prime deals, whatever it is.
Yeah, there's a a danger, I guess. I mean, one of the strengths of the NFL, its enduring strength, is what they call reach. They remain, most of their games remain on CBS, Fox, over-the-air TV, NBC. So, somebody without streaming packages can still watch the bulk of the games. I think that, and then of course you get Red Zone and Sunday Ticket, which are great products. Of course, you got to pay for those. But so they've tried to reach the biggest audience. A Thursday night game like the one tonight will still get what, 17, 18 million fans. A World Series game will get seven, maybe even less if it's Seattle against Milwaukee, so maybe more if it's the Dodgers. So it's head and shoulders above all the other leagues in terms of its reach, and therefore it can charge more for its sponsorships. The networks can charge more for its ads. Everything escalates from there. And so that reach has been important, and yet the reality is younger people don't even subscribe to cable anymore, so they have to dip their toe into the newer media. Google has YouTube TV and Sunday Ticket. You mentioned Amazon and Netflix. They don't want to go there quickly, but from 90% over the air games now, you'll probably get down to 80, maybe 75 over time. And then, somewhere along the way, they'll flip the switch and it'll be a majority streaming games, but not there yet.
Sports business isn't just about money; it's also about people, and the players in particular. It hasn't always been a ride straight up. The players had the issues with concussions. You're even seeing this week. You're seeing players talking about field conditions again.
Mhm.
How has that impacted the rise of the business that is the NFL?
Well, it's interesting. I had an editor when I got on this beat. The main story I was covering back then was the concussion crisis. This is around 2010, 2011. You had 5,000 players, former players, sue the league for fraud for hiding the dangers of concussions from them. That's a pretty remarkable thing to happen. That means that they're not being listened to. You don't go to court, because you want to. You do it because you're not getting any benefits or what it is you want. And the league really, certainly under Paul Tagliabue, did a pretty poor job of recognizing the problem. The committee they put to study concussions was putting out junk research. Roger Goodell saw that as a kind of existential threat. You had players like Junior Seau shooting themselves in the chest so that brains could be studied. I mean, this is bad stuff, right? And so one of the chapters in the book is about this concussion crisis, and I was fortunate to find a whole bunch of documents from depositions of the NFL executives talking about how do we change the subject? How do we get people to feel, moms particularly, that their sons will be safe playing the game? Because if not, we're going to turn into boxing and a niche sport that's all about violence, and it won't be mainstream in 20 years. The NFL, 2010, 2011, 2012, they start to pivot and realize we can't stonewall anymore. Let's settle the legal issues. That's obviously paramount. But let's try and change the narrative. Helmets, neurologists on the sideline, different protocols for return to play, change the kickoff rule. So the league has tried to look proactive. Some of it is window dressing. Concussions are mainly caused by whiplash, not safer. Helmets are really about not cracking your skull open. So it mitigates some of the concussion risk, but not all of it. And but I think the players themselves are getting smarter. So this was an existential threat to the league. Going forward, it remains one, although we're out of the sort of crisis period. You think about the demographics of America, it's a slowing population, and I meet parents all the time. They're putting their kids in soccer and baseball and other sports, basketball, and those are year-round sports. So if you put your kid in travel baseball now, they're not going to play football. And the studies show, many of them show that kids who play a sport are more likely to follow that sport when they get older. So now you're raising a generation of baseball fans basically as more kids play travel baseball and not necessarily football. So that's another risk to the NFL. They have to be very aware that they need to popularize the game in a new way, and that's really where flag football comes in.
Do you get the impression that you talked about how they tried to change the narrative about concussions? Did they change? Because we had Ben and Amalu on the show. We talked about it a lot when it was happening, and it did change. At least for Jason and I, it changed our own viewership. It became harder to watch. We didn't stop, but it did become harder to watch. Did Was the NFL successful because of what they did in changing the narrative, or is it just that the attention span of the country is such that eventually it just whittled away, even though the problem still existed?
Yeah, it's a little of both. I think their marketing was slick, for better lack of a better word. They put a lot of money into it. I don't want to dismiss that. A neurologist who's hired to be on the sidelines in an NFL game gets about $1,500 a game. That's some old numbers. It may be more now. So that's a lot of money you're putting in just to make sure there's somebody there. You have spotters in the press box that with binoculars to see if there's players who appear concussed.
Yeah, but then you
Um,
have Brian Dable who runs
Yeah.
over and
who
starts yelling at the coach. So it
yeah.
didn't go away.
Yeah, it didn't go away. I agree. So they have tried to address this and promote it, or at least say they're concerned. Um, and yes, every once in a while, Tua 2 years ago was hit twice, was put back in a game, and then he came back early and got an even bigger second concussion. Of course, the Damar Hamlin issue, which was not a concussion, but that this is the ongoing worry of the league is players with dementia and unfortunately a player who might ultimately die on the field. So they're aware of it, but I think the general public, media are also guilty of this. I mean, when I was starting to write these stories, the stories were everywhere. I think a lot of media just felt like, oh, they reached a concussion settlement, you know, issue settled. Let's move on. But it hasn't, as you noted. The coaches are sometimes guilty of this, the players themselves. But you do see players. This is remarkable. You see a player pulling himself out of a game because he didn't, felt like he had a concussion. We've come a long way from just smelling salts and get back in there.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff mentioned it. I watch football differently after our conversations with Dr. Amalo. We're talking about on the field. The NFL's influence extends far beyond the field. You cover that to culture, politics, religion. How have Jones, Kraft, and Goodell shaped the broader American narrative through football?
Jerry, celebrates it at every game. They always have the biggest flag on the field for the national anthem. There was a moment during the Colin Kaepernick inspired protests in 2017 where Jerry came out on the field, linked arms with the players, kneeled at the 50-yard line, and then stood for the national anthem. He's in that moment. That was a game, a Monday night game in Arizona. He was sort of visually talking to Donald Trump. He was saying, we can stand arm in arm with the players, but I'm not going to kneel for the national anthem. I'll kneel before it, and then I'll stand for it. So yeah, he definitely is kind of a standard bearer of the sort of patriotic wing of the NFL. But Robert also has been quietly influential. He was partners with Jay-Z and some of the Meek Mill and others who were trying to help players raise awareness on bail reform, things like that. And after the disastrous 2019 Super Bowl in Atlanta, where Maroon 5 was the halftime act, the owners were scared. I mean, big headline acts were saying, I don't want to play if you guys ask me. And there's nothing that scares them more than bad ratings and a bad halftime show. So it was that February of 2019 where Roger Goodell and Robert Kraft secretly flew to LA to meet Jay-Z. And so he realized Jay-Z wasn't just going to help with bridging the gap between the communities of color that were trying to fight for progressive issues like bail reform. He was also going to be signed on as the his Rock Nation was going to pick the next halftime acts. And so, this is classic Robert Kraft, trying to find multiple solutions to these problems. Let's get headliners in there. Let's revive the halftime show, but let's also address the players' issues or concerns. And what was shocking to me, it was one of the rare examples where Roger Goodell was actually out in front of the owners, obviously with Robert Kraft. Most of the time, he sits back and takes his cue from the owners. In that case, they announced that in August of 2019, this partnership with Rock Nation, and most of the owners didn't know about it. I know this because they called me and said, "What the heck just happened here?" I had one of the stories on it, and they were surprised. They were sometimes a couple of them were worried because they had heard Jay-Z's lyrics and they wondered what is the NFL doing with Jay-Z. So, but other owners said to me, "Well, as long as the halftime show gets better, I'm good with it." So I think most of them are kind of bloodless in that way.
Looking ahead as last one for me, with international expansion, streaming, gambling, AI, something else, if I were to ask you to write the sequel 10 years from now, what's
Hmm.
the next big frontier for the NFL?
International gets a lot of the attention, I guess rightly so. They're spending a lot of time on it, but I don't see a team in London in 10 years. I'd be surprised. So I know they're going to keep pushing there because that's where the new money is. I think they'll get to an 18th game in their, whenever they opt out of the labor agreement or sign a new one in 2030, 2031. That 18th game will allow them to play overseas every single week or 16 out of the 18 weeks. And at that point, they'll sell a new media package internationally for name the number $1, $2 billion. The money, they just can't help but find new money. So I think we'll have a longer season. The Super Bowl will end around President's Day weekend, which will make it a 3-day weekend. If it already wasn't a national holiday, it will become one. Um, and I think gambling will transform sports too, in a way. Unfortunately, I think probably not for the better. I think people's attention spans already frayed with second and third screens are going to get even more amped up. People's attention span for yeah okay the
That
days
makes
when you
it, yeah.
sat down with your son and watched a game and your team jersey, those are long gone. Your kid is probably watching highlights or Sunday Ticket anyway. um, so I think that's going to change, and the last piece of it is NIL, and the players are changing too. The players now in college are essentially free agents. They're being paid. They're coming into the league a lot smarter, a lot more aware of what they're worth. Think of this: the draft. They used to have 30 some odd players in the green room. For the privilege of going out there and hugging Roger Goodell for a photo op. Why are they doing that? Doesn't change your draft pick, right? Because you're in New York. You don't get drafted higher because you're in New York. And in fact, if anything, there's downside. You're going to be left in the green room for the second round. So, yeah, I could see players saying, "You want me on opening night? Pay me. You want me at the combine to run the 40? Pay me." I think there's going to be a lot more awareness and maybe activism on the players, at least when it comes to money, hopefully for safety reasons and others. But I think they're going to be a lot smarter as bargaining partners.
Yeah, I mean, holding out is a whole lot easier if you already made a couple $1 million before you get to the draft, right? So,
Well, or if you stand to make even more money your senior year, why come
mhm.
out junior year if you can just hang around and make, rookie salary and tying yourself up for 4 years? If you're going to be drafted in the third or fourth round, you make more money in college. That was part of the argument of Shador Sanders. Why don't you just stay? You'll make 5 million in college, and then you'll go in the first round the following year. I mean, it's a risk you take, obviously.
Yeah, but it's probably going on even with Carson Beck right now and other players like that.
Yeah,
They're making more money in
exactly.
college than they would have if they were drafted.
Yeah.
I you've talked a lot about the past, the present. Who succession planning is important to any business for it to thrive. Has the NFL thought about, or do you foresee who the next generation is of these owners, the current owners that are going to be taking the place of Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft, who are both getting up there in years?
Yeah, they're both in their 80s. Interestingly, both of them were asked about succession at the owners' meeting in March. Look, in both of their cases, they had their kids or have had their kids at their side from the outset. Stephen Jones in Dallas, Charlotte Jones, and Jonathan Kraft in New England. they're going to take over. They're already on many committees. They're already known quantities. They'll be well prepared when the time comes. But there is a new generation of owners with even more sophisticated, if you want to call it that, set of priorities. Josh Harris in Washington, private equity tycoon. Greg Penner in Denver from the Walton family, $70 billion in their bank accounts. Jimmy Haslam, not new anymore, 10 years or so, very much pushing for more private equity involvement. And they're just announcing their stadium outside of Cleveland. Very much of the recent mold you're seeing in Nashville and other cities with real estate around them. Football on Sunday is just the jumping off point to so many other business opportunities. So I think you're going to see much more than just a media company. You're going to see a media company plus hedge fund kind of mentality built into this. I think that's where the newer generation of owners are coming from.
I think that's called the Big Ten.
Well, maybe they'll all merge into one football
Right.
operation.
Says the Michigan man who always needs to get that in. If you're interested in how the NFL transformed from a sports league into a global empire, Every Day is Sunday is the book for you. Ken Belson, thank you for your work. It's a fascinating read, and thank you for your time to talk about it and break it down.
Thanks for having me on. It was great.